Hi, I'm Aaron Trotter, and I'm the creator of Illustrated Playing Cards, which all started with the Portland playing cards. And this deck of cards is 52 of my drawings. That is, all the places are sketched on location. I visit each place to make the drawings. And it all started with the Portland cards about 6 years ago. I was just walking around drawing Portland, and eventually I had over 50 drawings, and I turned it into a deck of cards. But the original sketches, I make it this size in my book, and I don't use a photograph. I draw everything on site. And these sketches I made when I was in Venice last spring, and that's what I've done for about 30 different cities around the world, mostly in the United States and Europe. I've gone to visit each city. I spend about 1 week drawing, and I walk around and sketch what I see. I meet the locals and talk to my bartender, and sometimes I stay with friends and family, or sometimes I stay in a hotel or a guest house. And it's a great way to get to know the city. It gives me a mission, and I collect all my drawings into these decks of cards to celebrate the city. Local Discoveries was one of the first places that ever sold my cards, back when my cards were just printed on cardstock at Kinko's, FedEx, but it was called Kinko's back then. And I would round corner all the cards with a little corner rounder clipper. It was like a fingernail clipper. It's like clip one corner at a time. That's how it all started. It was the duct tape boxes. And like Julie was the founder of Local Discoveries. She's like, "Oh, this is adorable. We'll sell these." And I said, "Oh, you want this thing? This is just it's a prototype." And she sold the prototype, and then I made another one, and she sold a few of them, and then I got them in some other shops, and then it just has blossomed from there. Before the cards, I was a traveler and always bouncing around with odd jobs. I was a taxi driver. I was an art teacher in an after-school program. I was a dishwasher, and then at McMiniman's, my last job, it started as dishwashing, and then I was promoted to prep cook, and then once I learned all the recipes, then they put me on as a breakfast cook, and I would open the restaurant in the morning. Kennedy School. I've always loved the old buildings, and that was one of my early drawings, was of the Kennedy School. But eventually working in the kitchen was too hard on my back. And I have a previous back injury, a few back injuries, plus backpacking around the world all through my 20s. And I'm 38 now, but I'm pretty sure that carrying a 40 to 60 pound backpack up and down mountains and across the world, and airplanes and all the train rides, and I mean, I've taken my body has traveled around the world so many times now. And I've carried so much weight on my back and my shoulders that I'm sure it's taken its toll. I don't regret a second of it. The highlight, I guess, I've visited the great cities of the United States, good old America, New York, Chicago, LA, San Francisco, Vegas, Denver. Most recently, I was in Venice, and on a 2-month trip that ended with Venice. I started with a trip across Russia, where I was drawing Moscow, and then I was sketching in Amsterdam and Berlin as well on that trip. But I drew Paris a few years ago, and Rome, and London, and Stockholm, and I love the world. And my grandmother said to me when I was a little kid, she's like, "Well, you're obviously going to take the road less traveled." And I thought it was funny, and I learned later that's a quote from a poem. But I really have followed up on that, and I am taking the road less traveled. I've found that along that way, getting lost along the way, I've found that there are many other people who are still on that road that's less traveled. It may not be a lot of people, but I always find friends on my travels and family too. My favorite place is the place I left off. I'd like to go back straight away to Venice, pick up where I left off, because it was just like not quite long enough, and maybe just keep exploring northern Italy. But I love Paris. I love the architecture of Europe and the history of Europe, but I'm also fascinated by Asia, and for me that's like the unexplored land. I'd like to go to Beijing, Shanghai, Hong Kong, and Taipei, and Seoul, and I traveled on my first big international trip to Australia and Southeast Asia, and Thailand, Cambodia, and I loved it. And I loved the ancient ruins and the Buddhist culture and the food and the jungle, the tropical, the colors. The tropical environment creates something different, and the creative feeling is different, and I always end up going more colorfully with my drawings in the tropical places. The cards are the vehicle for my passion. The cards are my job. The cards pay the way for me, but what my passion is travel and family and art and drawing. I love to draw and I love to travel, and my great hope and desire and my yearning for a long time was to be able to travel and see my family, to find my family that I'd never met, my long lost cousins on the French side, the Russian side. And I found them on Facebook, and we had this dialogue for many years, but we'd never met. Last spring I met the Russian cousins, but 4 years ago I met my cousin in Paris, and then I went to Stockholm with my dad, and to see his first cousins that are my second cousins, but they have children and they have children's children, and so it's just amazing to make this loop around the world again. But I hope to do more writing and travel stories. I hope people use it as a guide to the city. I'm planning on improving the cards that I've made to make them more useful as a guide for the city with maps. And the decks have maps, but actually, ironically or strangely enough, the first deck I made doesn't have a map yet. The new Portland decks, the brewery deck, the winery deck, and the Secrets of Portland, those have maps. But the original deck, I feel like it's almost like it's a sacred object now, because it was perfect. It sells the way it is. So I've been hesitant to change it, but I also feel like I want to make it more useful and update it. It has to stay current with new Portland, because Portland has changed before our very eyes within a few years. So I want to keep it being relevant in the city. Every deck comes with an index that lists the places, along with my artist statement, and the Joker cards refer to my plans to draw the world, and some of my artistic influences, like Pablo Picasso's Blue Period and Rose Period, and Andreas Mantegna and Albrecht Dürer, who are Renaissance engravers of northern Italy and Germany. Some of my favorite copperplate engravings and black and white illustrations were made by the Renaissance engravers, and that's why I owe my style of cross-hatching is to the early book illustration. I made a set of drawings of the historic buildings. Some of them are endangered of being torn down, and I did like a survey of the oldest, most beautiful buildings of Portland. And I studied many lists and many old maps, and I read many books about the history of architecture in Portland. And the inspiration for that came from the horrible news of the demolition of some of my favorite buildings. And it kind of it was born out of a protest against something that I didn't want here in Portland, but ultimately got to move on to the present. Can't just look back to the past. But it's another deck. It's like my 6th deck of Portland cards, which is 7th deck of Portland cards, which is 365 drawings.
Wow.
So I've got enough drawings for a whole year.
Could make a calendar.
I could make a calendar, a day calendar.
Yeah.
There are endless things to do with my drawings. I hope someone will find something more useful to do with them other than cards someday.